Control soil contamination. Soil contamination is a huge problem in the world today, and it's getting worse. We need to control soil contamination at any cost. It has been estimated that soil contamination accounts for over 1/3 of all water pollution, which can lead to serious health problems and economic losses if not dealt with properly. One way to control this problem is by using a geotextile fabric on your site before construction begins. Geotextiles are strong fabrics that allow air, water, and other substances to move through them freely without being obstructed or held back in any way. This prevents runoff from carrying contaminated soil away from your site, thus reducing the risk of contaminating nearby waterways. Control soil contamination by education. Over the last few years, there has been a large increase in soil contamination. This is largely due to an education gap between those who work with pesticides and other chemicals for farming or landscaping purposes and anyone else involved in these practices and their families. It can be hard to tell if you are at risk of this kind of exposure because it's not always obvious on your clothes when they come into contact with it. But many people have found out later what was happening after going through some medical tests, which revealed high levels of toxic metals such as lead or mercury building up over time inside their bodies from all sources, including direct ingestion by eating food grown near contaminated soils where runoff had occurred from chemical spraying onto crops during the growing season. Soil contamination is an issue that has been surfacing for years. Education programs can help control soil contamination. This problem by providing sound agricultural and food production techniques to rural farmers in developing countries and teaching more sustainable farming methods, such as crop rotation, which would decrease the number of fertilizers needed. Control soil contamination by controlling population. One way to prevent the Earth's soil from being contaminated is by controlling the population. Some ways of doing this would be for people who are not expecting children or have enough money to support a family should consider adopting instead of conceiving. The government should take a more active approach to control the population because of how much it contributes to soil contamination. This is not only an environmental issue but also one for public health and safety as well. The population's lack of concern has contaminated the soil. However, this can be solved if we focus on controlling our numbers instead of focusing solely on developing advanced technology to make life easier for humans and animals alike. Control soil contamination. Control soil contamination by recycling and reuse. The amount of trash that goes to landfills could be decreased by recycling and reusing. Recycling is the process in which materials are converted into new items for future use, while reuse is when we give old objects a second life before they become recyclable products. Unfortunately, the population's lack of concern has contaminated the soil. However, this can be solved if we focus on controlling our numbers instead of focusing solely on developing advanced technology to make life easier for humans and animals alike. Recycling and reuse could be crucial in order to control soil contamination. It can lower the amount of hazardous material that ends up in our environment, which will reduce toxic emissions from incinerators to a landfill or improper disposal sites like landfill. Control soil contamination by managing industrial waste. Control soil contamination by managing industrial waste can be done with a few simple steps. Firstly, you need to know where your biggest leakage points are coming from and set up cleanup plans accordingly. This would help keep contaminants away from nearby streams or wells, which may contaminate drinking water sources for people nearby if they were not already contaminated themselves because of exposure through air or food channels. Secondly, do what is needed to maintain land use zoning laws that prohibit hazardous materials near residential areas and any other restriction on construction sites limiting the number of toxins released into our environment. Contaminated soil is a serious problem that can be avoided by managing industrial waste more effectively. Industrial companies should focus on keeping the contamination away from their plants, improve their wastewater treatment systems. Industrial pollution causes contaminated soils, which are a major issue because it has been proven to cause cancer and other health problems for people who live near these facilities due to the inhalation of toxic chemicals like benzene and radon gas. In addition, however, landfills have hazardous leachate, which kills wildlife if they drink this water. Control soil contamination. Control soil contamination by agricultural practices. Farmers often turn to pesticides and fertilizers to increase crop production, but these practices can lead to excessive soil contamination. Soil pollution is a major issue for farmers. They must make the difficult decision between producing crops with increased yields or avoiding excess amounts of chemicals that could taint produce on their land. Farmers are faced with an impossible task when it comes down to this trade-off. Do I sacrifice my agricultural output now so fewer people will be poisoned by food later? Agricultural practices are a significant contributor to soil contamination in the US and worldwide. Artificial pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides, in addition to other such chemicals that do not decompose, often destroy organic matter, which causes toxins from these substances can leach into water tables or remain on top of ground surfaces, only returning after rains wash them away again, causing serious health hazards for both humans and animals. A recent study conducted by Cornell University has shown that more than 75% of people living near heavily farmed areas have elevated levels of nitrate nitrogen present within their bloodstreams, meaning they may be at an increased risk for heart disease, cancer, diabetes, strokes, among others with long-term exposures. Control soil contamination by avoiding chemicals. The soil is the stuff of life. It's what connects us to all living things, sustaining local and global ecosystems with its rich nutrients. But, unfortunately, chemicals can harm it by leaving residue in plants and animals, which could be harmful to humans if ingested or come into contact with skin. To maintain a healthy balance between our needs for food production and environmental protection, we need to take care not only of what chemicals are being used but how they're disposed of once done using them. Some people might think about chemical fertilizers as some wonder drug equivalent when feeding their garden. However, there's still plenty more than just nutrients going on inside those little granules. What many don't know is that fertilizer manufacturers often use dangerous toxins such as cadmium sulfate, polyvinyl chloride, PVC, that are very dangerous for the soil. Soil contamination is easily avoided with a bit of forethought and careful planning. By avoiding synthetic pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, or fungicides on your plants, you will not have excess chemical residue left behind that could be harmful to other living things like us. Control soil contamination. Control soil contamination by construction. Many people don't realize that construction can spread dirt and debris onto the surrounding soil, making it difficult to grow crops. In some cases, this process is irreversible. I'm sure you're as tired of hearing about pollution in our water supply as we are too, but how will these issues be dealt with without proper legislation? More research needs to go into an issue like this before any sweeping changes happen because there's no going back once something becomes contaminated. The soil is often contaminated with construction waste, which can harm the environment. Construction sites are major contributors to pollution and hazardous chemicals in our air, water, and land because of all the dirt that gets kicked up into these elements by vehicles driving around or equipment being used at work. The impacts on people living near construction zones vary depending on if they live close enough for it to affect their breathing quality negatively due to airborne pollutants like dust particles from crushed concrete. Areas where runoff seeps through cracks leading towards homes could contaminate drinking water sources as well, causing various health problems such as leukemia or cancer. Nearby wildlife will be disturbed when habitat destruction happens, so animals stop reproducing, contributing further environmental damage over time. We need to work on our action to control soil contamination.